My name is Paul Crow. I'm director of the Department of Humanities at Simon Fraser University. It's a department that's been around in various incarnations since the 1980s, actually. It started off as a program and evolved into a department. As part of that department, we also have a major outreach center, our Institute for the Humanities, which has a lot of programming all year round and does a lot of work in sharing the humanities with a wider public. I'd like to welcome you to SFU's Surrey campus this evening for a very special talk by a distinguished scholar whom we're lucky to have here in Vancouver for one semester. But before I make the formal introduction, I would like to make some acknowledgments. So first, you should all be aware that this evening is really, in large measure, supported by the Hari and Madhu Varshney Visiting Scholars Program in Indian Studies at SFU. They gave a generous donation to SFU to help support work in bringing excellent Indian scholarship and scholars to SFU to share the cultural heritage and intellectual history of India with Canadians. So it's part of SFU's mission to bridge cultures and reach out around the world and build friendships through mutual understanding. The contribution of the Varshneys actually is a way of enhancing a program that SFU entered into as one of the first in Western Canada to, actually the first in Western Canada, to establish a visiting scholar program with the ICCR, the Indian Council for Cultural Relations. So the ICCR supports this visiting scholar program, and it's funds from the Varshneys that have really helped to enhance and sustain that program. So we're deeply grateful for their contributions and for our ongoing work with the ICCR. I would also like to say a note of thanks to SFU International for the tremendous support we've received in making this evening possible, and to Yusuf Varacha too, who's really gone above and beyond in making sure that we were able to bring our excellent scholar into Vancouver. So this evening's talk, The Agonistic Engagement Between Ambedkar and Gandhi, is being presented by Professor Valerian Rodrigues in the front row, and we're really delighted to have him here in our department. He's an excellent colleague, as working with students. He's participated in the life of the department very fully. He's even had, I think you've had dim sum twice now in Chinatown, and I believe Turkish food, perhaps? A couple of nights, yeah. So we're introducing you to the delights of Vancouver's culinary culture as well. Valerian Rodrigues taught at Mangalore University and Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi, India. Most recently, he was Ambedkar Chair at Ambedkar University in Delhi, which concluded in 2018, immediately prior to his coming to Vancouver. I'd like to mention some of his recent publications, which you could look up, and one that's actually just come out. His recent books include The Essential Writings of B.R. Ambedkar, published in 2002, The Indian Parliament, A Democracy at Work, published in 2011, Speaking for Karnataka in 2018, and he's just published Conversations with Ambedkar, 10 Ambedkar Memorial Lectures, published, as I said, this year. And we are looking forward to celebrating the launch of that publication in March 21st, actually. So check out Humanities Department's Facebook page for details on that, on where and when and how you can come and participate. Professor Rodrigues was Senior Visiting Professor at Julius Maximilians University in Germany, and Indian Council of Cultural Relations, ICCR Chair in Contemporary Indian Studies at Erfurt University and Fellow at Max Weber College, Erfurt, Germany in 2012. He's also been Agatha Harrison Fellow at St. Anthony's College, Oxford University, and he received the University Grants Commission National Swami Pranavananda Saraswati Award for Political Science in 2011. He was also National Fellow of Indian Council of Social Science Research from 2015 to 2017, and served as a member of the advisory committee for the international conference Quest for Equity, Reclaiming Social Justice, Revisiting Ambedkar, which was held in Mangalore in 2017. There's much more I could say, but I think I'll leave it at that. And it's my delight to welcome Professor Rodrigues to the podium to share some of his research insights with us. Thank you.
Professor Paul Kroll, my colleagues at SFU, and friends. I thought I would try out an argument with you today. An argument in which two iconic figures of India are involved, Gandhi and Ambedkar. And I want to pose this huge contestation between them, and it is not a simple contestation, it's an agonistic contestation. And how I approach this concept, I would come later. So much of my lecture would be displayed on the board, and it's very uneven pages. So those of you who are not able to catch up with some of my words, you can profitably see on the screen. I start with certain assumptions. Both Ambedkar and Gandhi loom large over the public domain in India today. However, it is a very differentiated presence. Within India, Gandhi is officially projected as the father of the nation and continues to be projected as the moral icon for public life. But significant sections of Dalits, that is, the former untouchables, and the Hindu orthodoxy have been hostile to accord such acknowledgement. Political Dalits have seen Gandhi as having entrenched the dominance of the upper caste in India and prevented Dalits from becoming an autonomous force. Those references that I give within brackets, those are to certain authors. Those of you who want to pursue this particular argument, I could send you the references. Hindu orthodoxy has seen Gandhi as primarily responsible for the partition of India into India and Pakistan, weakening the hold of orthodoxy through his rereading of Hinduism, standing in the way of making India a Hindu nation, and resented his campaign for the abolition of untouchability. Increasingly, sections of Muslims and indigenous communities too are moving away from Gandhi, as he is seen as someone who entrenched the upper caste hold across India. Ambedkar, however, has tended to loom large across the Dalit world in India. And given the struggle of the backward castes against upper castes, significant sections of the backward castes have reverted to Ambedkar as their icon. Ambedkar's avowal of equality and attack on caste patriarchy has proved very attractive to many in India's deeply unequal society. His strong association with constitutional democracy also makes him a favorite of those sections who are apprehensive about the quest of Hindu majoritarianism. Ambedkar continues to remain the target of caste Hindus as the symbol of Dalit assertion, but has been included as one of their icons by parties across the political spectrum. And this is much more kind of utilitarian measure, an opportunist measure, because Dalits by themselves constitute about 17% of the population of India. Now, these two icons have also begun to mark their presence in the rest of the world. Gandhi still holds the fort not merely as the apostle of nonviolent mass movements and civic action, but also as the voice of simple living, religious pluralism, ecological concerns, or simply against old and new modes of dominance. There have been, however, protests against the iconization of Gandhi in several countries in Africa, particularly in Uganda and Ghana, and the charges against him have been collusion with imperialism, racism, etc. Recently, in Uganda and in Ghana, Gandhi's statues have been pulled down at the university campuses. In the last 2 decades or so, Ambedkar has reached to new social segments outside India. Blacks in the US and Africa, Dalit and lower caste diaspora, and Buddhism world over, and therefore significantly new sections have rallied after Ambedkar. Next, scholarly work. Now this is the public presence, but there is a lot of critical work recently, and it might be good for this audience that I introduce this academic critical work on both these people. Much public debate shelving Ambedkar and Gandhi into opposite camps abounds. Its high point was a book-length introduction to the annotated edition of Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste, titled The Doctor and the Saint by Arundhati Roy. Some of you might be familiar with Arundhati Roy, the lady who won the Booker Prize. Arundhati Roy sought to quote her from her introduction, rearrange the stars in our firmament, shift Ambedkar to what Gandhi, the space that Gandhi occupies in the Indian firmament. This introduction provoked a strong defense of Gandhi from several quarters, particularly by Rajmohan Gandhi, grandson of Mahatma Gandhi and noted philosopher and historian, which was rebutted by Arundhati Roy to make a scathing rebuttal of his defense. Some Dalit organizations also attacked Arundhati Roy and her publishers for appropriating Ambedkar for commercial gain. It led to reopening the big concerns of authenticity and representation. That is, who is entitled to speak for Ambedkar and to write for Ambedkar. Several writings and studies in recent years have also subjected Gandhi's claims and the hagiography surrounding him to critical scrutiny. And I have mentioned some of these works, particularly the work of Catherine Tidrick, that is Gandhi, Political and Spiritual Life, Joseph Lelyvelt's Great Soul, Mahatma Gandhi and his struggle with India, etc. Particularly to be noted is the work of Perry Anderson, The Indian Ideology. Perry Anderson, largely because as the former editor of New Left Review and a significant public commentator, wrote a work, small book called The Indian Ideology, and the first 2 chapters of this book are a scathing attack on Gandhi. Apart from these kinds of public debates, there are critical explorations on Gandhi, and they have multiplied from several major seats of the academia, exploring different facets of Gandhi's ideas or interpreting them afresh. I don't want to name the writings, but the important people would be Faisal Devji's work. Faisal Devji is in Oxford University, Akhil Bilgrami in Columbia, Ajay Skaria in Minnesota, Karuna Mantena at Yale, Aishwarya Kumar at Stanford, Uday Singh Mehta at Amherst. Most of them have published recently a book or some major essays on Gandhi. One thing that is constant to these critical studies is their attempt to distance Gandhi from what they regard as mainstream modes of thought in the transatlantic world. To the extent that these positions have no relationship to the Gandhi-Ambedkar engagement, we need not be concerned about them here. But sometimes the way certain authors read Gandhi, it has implications to the way the Ambedkar-Gandhi axis comes to be constructed. And I'm referring particularly to an essay recently by Uday Singh Mehta, where he begins to see Gandhi working against the idea of sovereign state and begin to locate Gandhi in the quotidian practices. And Ambedkar becomes the person who begins to very strongly defend the state and the necessity of the state against the kind of quotidian argument that Uday Singh Mehta tries to pose to Gandhi or encapsulate Gandhi. So the theme that I'm going to explore today, page 3, the theme, the usage of the term agonistic, a few key issues of engagement between Ambedkar and Gandhi, and the perspectival lens of the protagonists. Now, the term agonistic has been used by several scholars in recent times. I was a little, hesitant initially to engage with this term, but I later on thought that as an analytical concept, it might be very useful for me to locate this relationship. So I mean to say by agonistic 5 things, 5 determinations. First, an agonistic engagement is an engagement where positions and practices are caught in deep conflict. There is an alignment of understanding and interest around such positions and practices. Therefore, there is a regrouping of positions and interests around these conflicts. There is the third aspect that I want to suggest is there is a little possibility of resolution of the conflict through deliberation or overlap. There are changing terms of engagement, and these changing terms of engagement, their pace and the support they envisage, they undergo changes, and there are assumptions shared in common by the parties in contention. So let me pose my argument now. I don't want to put Gandhi and Ambedkar as polar opposites. I'm actually beginning to build up an argument that they actually begin to throw up issues which are deeply in contention, and that contention cannot be easily resolved. And we have to probably live with this contention, although the terms of the contention are undergoing changes. I'm trying to illustrate this in terms of 3 big issues. The first one, 5th, untouchability and caste. The structure of my presentation is giving a little introduction about the engagement and then work out the tension and conflict between the two, and then say why it is agonistic. There is no one in India who realized the banality of the practices of untouchability as Ambedkar and Gandhi did. Being born in an untouchable caste, Ambedkar was its victim, and Gandhi thought that elimination of this evil is foundational to India for Swaraj or self-rule. To Hinduism, he argued, to retrieve itself from the degeneration it has sunk in, abolition of untouchability is important. He argued that to forge Hindu-Muslim unity, you cannot do that unless Hindus begin to show that they are capable of abolishing untouchability, and for the emancipation of the self from the evil it is caught in. Both the writings of both of them on untouchability try to grapple with this evil passionately, forming a shared threshold. Similarly, they both recognized, unlike many others, the deep impact of the caste system in ordering social relations in India. Where is the sustained and potentially irresolvable conflict in this engagement? It lies in the way they understand untouchability and the caste system, the relations in which they are caught, and the kind of intervention they call for. Ambedkar distinguished between caste and untouchability, although they, according to his analysis, were entwined. Untouchability is a social relation that excludes a people from human association as mean, polluting, and repulsive, but includes them within caste ranking as the lowest of the low, condemning its members to the meanest of the occupations. Such treatment is religiously ordained with sanctions for violations. Ambedkar also argued that there is a complicity of untouchability with the ranked order of the caste system, which implies that any assertion of a lower rank is nipped in the bud by the immediate next rank, leaving the system intact. The principle that informs this system is not mere inequality, but graded inequality, which ensures that no protest is generalized and the appeal of reason remains at bay by the injunctions of religion or dharma. Ambedkar further argued that devotional Hinduism, which we generally, one of its expression is bhakti, which invokes a common deity, may find adherents drawn from several castes, but does not affect this system, since the equality of the devotee before God does not mean equality in quotidian practices and social interactions. At the most, the fruit of such devotional engagement is an add-on in the emancipatory path, or a positive accrual to one's karma or action or rebirth, but has little bearing in reordering social relations. The fourfold varna, that is Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, the fourfold varna matrix, supposedly based upon birth, although may not uphold heredity, it does not have a place for effort and freedom to choose one's occupation. And then Ambedkar argued that it is impossible to maintain a Chaturvarna system in modern times because it would involve a great deal of power to bear upon people not to cross boundaries. Therefore, Ambedkar's argument is, if you want to see the end of untouchability, the trajectory of emancipation involves, number one, doing away with shastras or the scriptures that uphold untouchability practices. Two, organizing self-help, including political action. And three, striving for a different order of social relations governed by morality. Buddhism has much to offer in this direction for everyone, and eventually Ambedkar embraced Buddhism. How does Gandhi see how does he see the picture of untouchability and caste? Gandhi uses a strong moral language to condemn untouchability. He calls it ghostly sin, a bar sinister, and excrescence. However, he finds no sanction in Hinduism for this social practice and considers it an affront to the scriptures. He argues, number one, that a religion such as Hinduism, whose central principles are truth and nonviolence, could not have given rise to a monstrosity such as untouchability. That any passage that smacks of untouchability in the Hindu scriptures is an interpolation, and the principle of Varna has nothing to do with untouchability. Gandhi also makes campaign against untouchability practices his priority. Gandhi considers certain natural calamities, like the big famine of Bengal in 1934, as curses for the practices of untouchability, and associates himself with untouchables and stands up to the wrath of orthodoxy in this pursuit. Gandhi argues that responsibility belongs where the culpability lies. The upper caste, through their social practices, have reproduced this evil. It is they who should bring it to an end by changing their practices and making moral amends for the same. The untouchables have not committed any offense, but have been the injured party, and therefore they need not take any action to retrieve themselves from that evil. For Gandhi, removal of untouchability is closely associated with the enablement of Hinduism. Hinduism, he argues, has shown such strength in the past and will be able to demonstrate it afresh. Gandhi also speaks of the widespread impact of his anti-untouchability campaign and the positive response of the upper caste. Untouchability is a moral culpability rather than a matter of law and politics. Therefore, separate electorate is not an answer to the problem of untouchability. Ambedkar was arguing for a separate representation for the Dalits or untouchables. Gandhi further argues that untouchables should not shirk from their traditional duty in their opposition to the upper caste. Remember, the untouchables performed the meanest of the works, and there were certain works they had to perform, and no one else performed those works. And Gandhi argued that they should not shirk from their duties, traditional duties, nor should they wage satyagraha against such duties. Because he argued that one of the central tenets of Hinduism is to earn one's livelihood through one's ancestral callings. Gandhi was opposed to other people participating in, other religious people participating in anti-untouchability campaign, because he thought that this is a concern which is internal to Hindus and does not call for wider solidarity on behalf of the untouchables. He also thought that self-organization of untouchables will beget widespread violence and they would be its victims. And further, he thought that it is important for the British to get out of India if we have to actually fully come to terms with this particular problem. Gandhi has a long hermeneutic debate with Ambedkar, and one of the big issues that Gandhi raises is that religious texts or the Shastras cannot be read like any other text. We need to read them with the eyes of faith. Gandhi, of course, is deeply caught in ambiguous positions and changing positions on the caste question. However, he held on to the argument that everyone should live by following their ancestral occupations for reasons of moral economy, and there are no occupations inferior or superior. He sought to undercut gradations and ranking of occupations rather than promote choice of occupations. He also argued that India's traditional doctrine of four castes, four varnas, encompass them. The positions that Ambedkar and Gandhi took on this issue and the interpretation that they provided not merely aligned them against each other, but also galvanized entire social constituencies favoring one or the other. Clearly, Ambedkar's call to self-help among Dalits and to undercut the authority of the scriptures that legitimize untouchability and caste practices was rebutted by Gandhi. Ambedkar responded saying, and I'm quoting him, "It may be your interest to treat us as slaves, but how can be our interest to be your slaves? And how long the humanity of the untouchables can await your generosity?" Gandhi responded saying that untouchability, being a moral offense, cannot be rooted out without a change from within. He also drew the argument of resource monopoly, upper caste held all the ropes, untouchables would simply be cannon fodder. Ambedkar clearly had a better argument, but there were few resources to turn that argument into action. He tried hard to regroup resources, but many studies demonstrate that the issue of conflict remains alive even today. Let me come to the second big issue where they clash: democracy and Swaraj. The term Swaraj is common both for Ambedkar and Gandhi, but they assign very different significances to this notion. Gandhi is often credited as the author of the public culture of democracy, with his emphasis on the masses, deliberation, significance of institutions, and non-violence as the basis of social relations. However, there is a deep ambivalence in Gandhi on the idea of democracy. While Ambedkar is credited with laying down the foundations of constitutional democracy in India, he at the same time subscribes to the expansive notion of democracy with critical relationship to constitutional democracy. And let me formulate their respective positions on this issue and why there is this enduring conflict between them. Ambedkar distinguished between the idea of nationalism and the idea of Swaraj, that is self-rule, understood as self-government. Swaraj may not encompass all the social cleavages in a diverse society unless this concern is factored in our approach to it and in political institutions and policies ensuing from it. Ambedkar argued that in a society made of social closures, exclusions, and ranked inequalities, while all may rally against a mode of domination, such as colonialism, that is common to all, it does not necessarily beget horizontal bonds or what he called consciousness of kind or corporate feeling of oneness across. He further argued that social closures and deep diversity throughout minorities, which are distinct from political minorities in a liberal electoral democracy. These minorities may be rooted in religious, linguistic, and cultural belonging, or historically engendered exclusion and deprivation. In fact, the post-colonial context may prove disastrous to such minorities, since the majority can tend to appropriate the nation to itself. Such a rule can become tyrannical and may even take on distinct fascist overtones. It can be a newfound bondage to religious, ethnic, and cultural minorities. He argues, under such conditions, Swaraj should imply not merely a distinct disposition of the political or cultural majority towards the minorities, but also constitutional and legal order that upholds the rights and claims of the minorities and takes them into confidence in formulating the common good. The disposition of the majority that I mentioned, spelt out in moral terms, would imply respect for human dignity, a deference to self-definition of communities, acknowledging reason and capacity for reasoning as universal attributes, etc. Politically, it calls for an arrangement whereby the majority, while remaining the prevailing element, would not be preponderant. Now, what is the conception of democracy that he advanced? I have written quite a bit on this. I would like to provide a sort of a definition. Ambedkar saw democracy as a self-defining community of free and equal members who associate themselves in the indefinite future, defining and redefining their life afresh. It is bound by its own deliberated choice and not by a telos above and beyond itself. Such a public, he argued, almost in Aristotelian sense, would provide to its members diverse and expansive reach, enabling them to realize the perfection they seek. Ambedkar saw constitutional democracy as a critical interlude that enables democracy to become a way of life. While cultural elements and their interpretation may contribute to this end, such attempts may get bogged down with the particular. And therefore, he had not great faith in the great devotional saints who began to talk about equality, because he thought that this would be a highly localized experiment with little possibility of generalizing it. Now, what is the position that Gandhi takes on this relationship between democracy and Swaraj? Gandhi used the term Swaraj in a twofold sense of being self-government and self-rule. He thought that self-government should be a prelude to a dispensation where people come to rule themselves. Self-government, he argued, is the condition sine qua non for the re-articulation of the relation between different political groups that colonial regime had engendered. Categories such as majority and minority or diversity engendered groups, except religious and national, did not hold much significance to Gandhi. Gandhi argued that self-rule is impossible with greater needs and dependencies or expanding wants. Technology and industrialization tend to spearhead the latter. They make a big state inevitable with its expanding system of controls and regulations. Violence is inbuilt into these processes. Self-sufficiency is the mantra for self-rule. The minimum is the state, the better it is. The village is the ideal political unit. It should be able to meet all the minimum needs. It affords maximum participation to all its members. All its members with least control and direction. There is an intimate connection between life centered around the bottom of the pyramid and fostering of associations, bonds, and friendship that nurture the intimate self. Gandhi thought poorly about liberal democracy and the structure of freedoms and rights it gives expression to. Let me now put the conflict between them. The divide between Gandhi and Ambedkar in the conception of freedom and democracy is an enduring conflict. It might be better to express it in their own words. Ambedkar, I am quoting him, in an ideal society there should be many interests consciously communicated and shared. There should be varied and free points of contact with other modes of association. Only thereby there could be a social endosmosis, a term that he employed from John Dewey, his teacher. The wider such circles of association and greater access, better would be the conditions for the fullest growth of a person. After reading Gandhi's classic work in Swaraj, one of his colleagues wrote to Gandhi expressing his exacerbation as an individual to emancipate India. Gandhi's reply, and I think he would have given this reply to anyone, please do not carry unnecessarily on your head the burden of emancipating India. Emancipate your own self. Even that burden is very great. Apply everything to yourself. Nobility of soul consists in realizing that you are yourself India. In your emancipation is the emancipation of India. All else is make-believe. The third issue that I want to put before you, that is the idea of religion and self. While the meaning of religion is varied and could little serve as an analytical category today, both Ambedkar and Gandhi used them extensively, occasionally problematizing its meaning. They thought that this is a distinct domain that stands for the expression of some of the deepest cravings of human beings, and in its absence, life will not hold much meaning beyond the here and now. They also agreed that the religious domain is not private but public. One cannot think of a robust policy ignoring religion. They were also critical of existing religions and sought to redefine them and the relation across religions in their own distinct ways. Both of them realized the imperative need not merely to understand and interrogate this domain, but thought that it is indispensable to nurture a confident self. Coming to Ambedkar. Ambedkar thought that religion is a quotidian sphere that informs our dispositions and actions and orients us to act in certain ways. As a quotidian sphere, it reaches out to human joys and suffering, wants and anxieties, and helps fashion a self that is comfortable with itself and its environment. In this sense, it is pre-political, but plays a major role in shaping the political, including its norms and institutions. Ambedkar felt that religion is not a sphere that roots a person to the transcendental, but situates him or her in the social. Rights and liberties inform everyday relations precisely because they are sustained and legitimized through their moral grounding qua religion. Ambedkar argued that there are different religions. Religions of principles and religions of rituals. Religions of rituals foster blind belief, promote priestcraft, and discriminate among believers by setting up a ritual nexus between the believer and the divine. In much of his writings on Hinduism, he argued that Hinduism is a religion of rituals which has little place for principles. Ambedkar also argued that religions which are esoteric, that is, those that cannot be accessed through reason, such as Islam and Christianity, are not acceptable to him. I couldn't read, sorry. Their conception of the divine is an affront to human dignity too, dwarfing human possibilities. He also argued that religion is social and did not accept atomized ways of emancipation in the name of religion. And therefore, initially he was in favor of the great body of literature called Upanishads in India, but eventually began to reject Upanishads as a model of the scriptures. Religion also cannot be against the scientific spirit and its demonstrated evidence. Ambedkar eventually squared his understanding of religion around the teachings of the Buddha, as he found all the criteria that he sought in a religion included in Buddhism, or he imputed these criteria to Buddhism in his writings. He crafted the life and teachings of the Buddha from the existing Buddhist archive by employing a distinct hermeneutic and rejected the Buddhist religious lore that was not in tune with it as interpolation or as Brahminical importation. Ambedkar denied that there is a pre-existent self or Atman that is distinctive to the human or constitutes the human telos. Eventually, he came to deny the existence of God or transcendental soul and placed a series of arguments for this denial in the mouth of the Buddha. He radically reinterpreted the concept of religion, dharma and dhamma, and karma and kamma, and related them to morality. Ambedkar also argued that human agency is the product of the physical and social world that we inhabit, and our social and cultural universe is the outcome of this agency at work. The ideal religion is the one which enables pursuit of self-perfection. Liberty, equality, and fraternity are essential for such endeavor. He found Buddha defending these values, and he eventually in his writings thought that they cannot be exclusively put as the slogans of the French Revolution. Gandhi, how does he see the relationship between the two? Gandhi called himself a Sanatani, an orthodox believer in Hinduism. In many ways, he regarded himself as its creative interpreter, as Yug Purush, as Professor Bhikkhu Parekh calls him, and as part of this tradition. The complex web of Gandhi's understanding of religion underwent significant changes over time with a few constants. And what are these constants? One, there is a supreme being, and the soul or Atman that inhabits in each one of us seeks its unity with the supreme being. Two, Atman is distinct from Jiva, that is the self. Every man is a unique self made of distinct dispositions, propensities, and temperament inherited from birth. The self is the principle of discreteness and individuality. It is a seat of desires and wants and projected itself in time. It has a history encompassing several lifespans. Gandhi also argued that every man is solely responsible for what he is, and his actions beget the cycles of rebirth or punarjan. The nature of the Atman demands that one releases oneself from the entanglements of needs and wants and the entanglements that they beget. But given the fact that one is a unique self, and the path to such emancipation is also unique to everyone, the final human realization is moksha, that is, liberation from the cycle of births and rebirths. Moksha consisted in dissolving the identity of self as well as that of the other by attaining total identification with the limitless ocean of life. Religion represents the way man conceives and relates himself to God. It encompasses the domain of prayers, fast, penance, meditations, etc. And morality that stipulates the relation across human beings. Since there are pluralities of ways of such pursuits, there are and necessarily will be a pluralities of religions, and no religion can claim truth as its exclusive possession. If anyone does so, it is sheer arrogance, reducing the cosmic truths to the limited truth of one's life. Different religions, therefore, can coexist within the same social space and can be mutually enriching with regard to their experiences. And therefore, somebody like Abul Kalam Azad, a great Islamic scholar, was a great friend of Gandhi, and both of them thought that several religions can cohabit the same space. Religions also have worked out distinct ways of reaching out to God, and therefore dialogue across religions can be an immensely enriching experience. He employed the Jain concept of anekantvad to denote the plurality of paths to the divine. While truth is infinite and human grasp of it is limited, respect towards other seekers after truth and towards cultures and traditions is integral to the very search for truth. At the same time, one cannot be other than what one is, and respect for one's moral integrity required that every individual should live by the truth as he or she saw it. Gandhi thought that Hinduism is the great laboratory of the search after the divine through the path of ahimsa. The most significant pursuits of man demanded that a person is free. Swaraj, or self-rule, therefore, was the essential human condition. Gandhi also rallied against modern civilization as it is based on celebrating man's mundane wants rather than focusing on the search after truth. Gandhi's approach to religious traditions and its practices were of respect, as it is sustained by many in their spiritual, as it has sustained many in their spiritual pursuits. While he avoided much of the rituals of Hinduism, Gandhi did not go to a temple, a traditional temple. He was not indisposed to discarding or modifying many of them that he considered a gloss. The winding, the sentence that the difference in the respective understanding of religion and the self that Gandhi and Ambedkar advanced was basic, anchored on the legacies of Vedic traditions on one hand and Buddhist traditions on the other. One can find a resonance of this divide today, the way the religions and ascetic traditions are regrouping around the paradigms set by Ambedkar and Gandhi. A few concluding remarks. There are many other issues that this conflict between Ambedkar and Gandhi can encompass, particularly the idea of nationalism, the idea of state and power, and the axis of the universal and the particular. But definitely, this is not the time to stretch into these issues. Now, the last two comments that I want to make. While some of the epistemic, moral, and political concerns are already indicated in the above exposition and need not be subjected to reflective consideration here, it may be instructive to indicate some of the wider concerns that made Gandhi's and Ambedkar paths to converge as well as entangled in sustained conflict. First, religious concerns, identities, and invocations were an integral part of the constitution of the nationalist public in India. Their distinctiveness, potential coexistence, zones of conflict, and dominance, subordination, etc., became integral to nationalist imagination. There was little possibility of marking off the religious domain from the secular, except in very superficial ways. every significant political thinker in modern India commented on one or the other aspect of his religion in his writings. Yesterday I was recalling, is there any person except the left who have written a significant book where religion doesn't figure in, and you won't find a book? We normally think that Jawaharlal Nehru is a secular writer, but read closely Nehru's writings, the great writings, his autobiography or Discovery of India. They are very strongly embedded within a Brahminical kind of a paradigm. So, and you can see this. Say for instance, in the Discovery of India, that is the great book that he wrote in 1946, he begins to argue that India has been provided a stability across centuries because of a particular axis. And that axis he sees as Brahma Kshatriya, that is, Brahmins and Kshatriyas, as holding India together over the centuries. And this is definitely from the tradition. The last comments, conclusion, the last. While the idea of the political in India today is overtly caught in electoral processes and the market, there is much disconnect between the social churning underway, deeply caught in the issues of deep and sustained antagonism that Ambedkar and Gandhi raised. And I feel that the issues that Ambedkar and Gandhi raised are foundational issues. And while everyday politics may not be engaged with them, you can see the ripples being played out. 2, constitutional democracy straddles over the social divide in India, advancing a thin bond rather than a thick mode of governance. And lastly, probably the issues of engagement between Gandhi and Ambedkar have much wider implications and are not merely confined to India. Thank you so much. Thank you. I took a little long. Also comments or revisions or alternative points of view.
Thank you, Professor Rodrigues. First of all, I'm sorry I arrived late. I had another
Thank you
meeting
for for coming.
But I just wanted to acknowledge and say thank you for highlighting and helping me understand some of the conflicts, that existed between the thinking of Gandhi and Ambedkar. And I was reflecting on the interview that Dr. Ambedkar had done on BBC towards the latter part of his years, and in that interview, Dr. Ambedkar, came across as very frustrated, very upset, and frustrated at Gandhi and some of the things that he had done. So what you have said really helps to understand where Dr. Ambedkar was coming from. So a couple of questions which I have and comments, and I'd like to get your input on. Dr. Ambedkar really felt strongly about separate electorate system because he saw that a single voting system is not going to be the solution, and that's exactly what we're seeing today. It's not working. So given, even though some progress has been made, but given that some of the elected officials that we have have become totally ineffective, right, in terms of putting the cases forward. So my question is whether or not it's the time now to revisit and make another call to have a separate electorate system in India. So electoral reforms are needed, and the question would be, is it time to revisit that? And if so, how could we be more effective at it? Second one is in your conclusion, I was really glad to see that some of the things that are being highlighted are not applicable just to India, but the framework of Ambedkar also applies globally, which makes sense because we are living in a global village. Some of the social issues that we have seen in India are impacting us, even people from Indian origin, but also to the broader population. So then question would be that if we're living in a global village, and if these issues are applicable not only to India but outside of India, how could we, strengthen our relationships with other movements, so that we could be working more towards a common vision. So just wanted to first of all say thank you for sharing your perspective, helping us understand where Dr. Ambedkar and Gandhi's were coming from, and then I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts in terms of where do we go from here? Thank you.
Yeah. Do I take a few more queries, or I start giving? These are very important and very big questions. And therefore, I use this concept of agonistic. How do you revisit some of these big problems? The upper castes in India have not changed their heart, as Gandhi would actually begin to say. In private conversations, if you go, the private conversations in the upper caste circles are generally very strongly abusive, if not remaining quiet about Ambedkar. I have not seen a very positive disposition that is coming towards Ambedkar from the upper classes. So this public acknowledgement of Ambedkar electorally is much more calculative, opportunistic kind of reasoning. And on the other hand, Ambedkar's arguments of self-help might have helped a small stream, but has not benefited a large number of the majority of Dalits in India. And there has not been much of a conversion to Buddhism, or there has not been a movement away from Hinduism to any kind of egalitarian religions. There has been some conversion to Christianity, but Ambedkar had his serious problems with regard to Islam and Christianity. So where do we go? I'm just stretching this. Where do we go from there? Maybe I don't have an easy solution, but let me actually begin to pose 2 or 3 big issues from this particular agonistic engagement. The first one, I think it is important, and Ambedkar does that in a famous lecture that he gave in 1942 when he was a member of the Viceregal Council with regard to the labor question. Whether the working class question in India, particularly of informal labor, and the amount of informal labor in India is growing, whether that question can be built-in component of the larger process of social emancipation in India. There is also one of the, in philosophy of Hinduism, in this particular text, Ambedkar begins to say that what would have happened if suppose somebody like Jinnah, I mentioned this to Daryl the other day, suppose somebody like Jinnah, who had great secular credentials, was to bring in the backward classes, Dalits and minorities together on a common platform and begin to think about a kind of a future through a kind of a site of this kind. Ambedkar himself tried it out in 1952 and 1953 when he actually went with Lohia, and Lohia's backward class kind of orientations. So one of the ways, and I have written a little on this, one of the way is to unwind probably the kind of constituencies that have come up in India and to rebuild an alternative kind of a political registry or archive. Now, what I am suggesting is not very idealistic. It is, to some extent, it is happening, these particular processes. And probably Indian democracy will show this particular inventiveness as people begin to realize that they have not much benefited from the system that is on. With regard to the issues that I have raised, of course, I have a global angularity, although this big debate comes to be played out in India. There has been an argument which I tend to defer to, that is all the post-colonial kinds of developments in the non-European world have come to benefit, in one guise or the other, have come to benefit an elite section of the population in these countries. And it is important to build bridges cutting across national boundaries with large number of people who have remained outside any kind of recognition or meaning in terms of their lives. And Jay, one of the very interesting book that has come out recently is the book Radical Ambedkar, edited by one of your friends and Teltumde. And several articles in this book begin to argue that there is a possibility of building up new bridges with people who have been marginalized, not merely in India, but across the globe. Now, this is of course going to be a very thin platform, but all platforms have been thin, political platform, when they started. And at least there is a particular kind of inventory being launched in the process. That would be my quick responses. Maybe, it could be a little more thicker in terms of politics with regard to revisiting India today, but I don't think this audience might be much more interested in a stronger package with regard to the political future of India. I would leave with those two comments. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Rodrigues, for laying out so clearly this agonistic relationship between Ambedkar and Gandhi. I have essentially two questions. I mean, and they are, I think, in some way related. The first is, you have mentioned a kind of cynical use of Ambedkar by the forces of Hindutva, which, I mean, you've touched upon that a couple of times, but I still quite grasp this instrumentalization. So if you could speak a little bit more about that, especially when, as you point out, he almost anticipates this majoritarianism moving in an extremely authoritarian and indeed quasi-fascist direction. So it's almost as if they're trying to habilitate or rehabilitate a very staunch critic, as in they being Hindutva. So that's one question, and the other question relates to it somewhat, insofar as if we really take up this question of agonism, and you note a number of different theorists of agonism, Arendt and Adorno, interestingly, also Mouffe, of course. But at the end, you say antagonism, right? But it's clearly a difference between agonism, for Nietzsche, is a conflict between friends. It's a part of friendship, where each of the parties tries to push one another to be better. It's a kind of, perfectionist approach in a way. Whereas antagonism is between friend and foe, right? And the theorist of antagonism is Carl Schmitt. And it seems that's very much the direction which things are going in India today, trying to find enemies, defined enemies of the state and of a particular movement and party. So the question is, can we see this relationship between these two key figures as an agonistic relation, as you pointed out, as, in a sense, an alternative model? That there are deep differences, huge stakes in their positions, but they are engaged in a form of agonism, as opposed to antagonism, where the aim is to destroy the other, right? Friend, foe, it's an existential conflict. One of us must prevail. So can we see this as a sort of model? So those are the two questions.
Thank you, Samir. Again, very big questions. How is Ambedkar being appropriated by a formation in India called the Hindutva? That is primarily a formation which begins to argue for Hindu nationalism. Now, Ambedkar has these copious writings, stretching from 1917, the major essay that he wrote on caste and its origins, up to 1956, the great book, Buddha and his Dhamma, the big book. So you have writings of 40 years. Where does Hindu nationalism begin to pitch its mark? First, of course, it begins to pitch its mark by highlighting the difference between Gandhi and Ambedkar, because Hindu nationalism has not been very comfortable with Gandhi. And by arguing that Gandhi is responsible for the creation of Pakistan, that it is Gandhi who attempted to befriend Muslims, and Ambedkar is someone, is projected by this particular kind of notion. Ambedkar is someone who begins to call caution on that, doesn't take sides with Gandhi, and therefore interpreting Gandhi, Ambedkar as someone markedly different from Gandhi. This is one. There are certain texts of Ambedkar, particularly the book Pakistan or Partition of India, which could be read in a number of ways. Now, this book is an interesting book because this book begins to argue that this is a lawyer's book. The book begins to argue there is a case for India remaining united. There is a case for Pakistan. But eventually, if you want to have one united India, the key to that is deliberation and debate between the protagonists involved. But both of them are not showing any inclination towards any kind of deliberation. They are holding on to their essentialized positions, and therefore you can almost see that Pakistan is going to come about. So this is a lawyer's argument. And Ambedkar begins to put forward the argument that nation is a fellowship, is a product of negotiation across diversity that is present in a country like India. And you cannot actually have a nation in India by someone declaring that India is a nation. Or as Gandhi or Nehru to some extent did, trying to project the ancestry of the Indian nation to the past. Now, this text, which runs to about 500 pages, can be read in a number of ways, because Ambedkar engages with the different constituencies, makes very strong comments, and then later on comes and says that probably the best thing that could happen given this antagonism is dividing India, because no country would actually prosper given the kind of antagonism that exists. Now, Hindu nationalism has interpreted this text as expressing a strong partisanship towards Hindu nationalism, to Indian nationalism, and arguing that Muslims are not trustworthy. And over the years, and from Savarkar onwards, there has been an argument that all religions that came up in India, Buddhism, Sikhism, Jainism, they are part of the larger Hindu ethos. Ambedkar did not convert himself to Christianity or Islam, embraced Buddhism, and therefore he is part of the larger Hindu fold. So you can actually begin to push. I'm giving just 3 examples. You can push certain writings of Ambedkar. And then there is, see, you have about 400 and odd Dalit castes in India, 484. You know? And there is a great deal of unevenness across Dalit castes. There are certain Dalit castes which have benefited, certain Dalit castes which have not benefited as much as other castes. And it varies across the board. So you have Hindu nationalism reaching out to some of these constituencies and begin to say, you have not benefited at all, and tying up Ambedkar with these particular caste groupings which feel that it is because of my neighboring caste I have not benefited. So there is a certain amount of apart from arguments, there is a new kind of political alliance that is being constructed, and Ambedkar is drawn as the icon of this new kind of formation of alliances, and it is going to go on in a very big way even today. Yeah, I agree with you fully. I think the relationship between Ambedkar and Gandhi, and that's where my central argument lies, is agonistic. Agonistic in the sense that it is not an antagonistic relationship like Arundhati Roy would like to project it. But it is a relationship where there are 2 constituencies who actually have to wrestle themselves in terms of working out the futures. It cannot be done by one constituency trying to rough road on the other, but by being engaged with the others. To some extent, sections of Dalit intelligentsia themselves are responsible for this, because they take up the Pune Pact as one instrument and begin to charge Gandhi as being responsible for their situation today. But you cannot make a further progress at all by keeping this antagonism alive. And I personally think that people like Perry Anderson or Arundhati Roy are playing on this antagonism rather than thinking about the future around which the larger debate has to go. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
A quick question. I'm really interested in John Dewey. Oh, sorry? Yeah, I'm very interested in the connections you draw to John Dewey in the work of Ambedkar, and you'd mentioned that Ambedkar reinterpreted Dhamma and Kama, and I'm interested in that. Now, Dewey has been used as an interpretive lens through which to understand Confucian thought, and I think quite successfully. I wonder, is that reinterpretation of Buddhist ideas also coming from a broadly Deweyan perspective, or is it something else going on? We could just focus on comma if you like.
Dewey, Ambedkar remains very close to Dewey, and in one of his statements, very superlative kind of statement, Ambedkar said, even if all the writings of Dewey were to be destroyed, I would be able to rewrite them. It is a little exaggerated, but the whole thrust is Ambedkar kept going through Dewey's writings, and I have seen his collection of Dewey. He had one of the best collection of Dewey till these volumes came to be published in the US. Dewey himself underwent a major transformation from his earlier moorings in Christianity by the late 19th century and began to see democracy as the future, almost like transposing his Christianity to the site of democracy as the creative future of mankind. Ambedkar begins to see democracy in a strong Deweyan sense. The concept of the human that Ambedkar proposes, that is, you can become human only through the social relations that you have. And the larger and the wider and the denser are these social relations, the greater would be the human dimension that you would be able to reach. For Ambedkar, this argument went very well because you live under a system which treats you, which almost precludes you from reaching out to any human level. And therefore, this Deweyan argument went very well so you can see that Dewey is present in, and then of course, Dewey with Du Bois in late 20s formed his own party against Roosevelt. And Ambedkar was deeply influenced by this Deweyan initiative. Dewey said that my program of action or political transformation takes overboard several socialist dimensions, but I would not like to call it as socialist because it is unworkable in the US. So you have a very strong social democratic agenda, and Ambedkar did not very seriously engage with this term called socialism, but often offered a very radical agenda for social transformation. So there are a lot of parallels between the two, but these parallels can be explained partly because Ambedkar thought that Dewey was one of his best teachers. He calls him as his best teacher. He doesn't call him guru, he calls him as his teacher. So there are influences, and there has been quite a bit of writing on this now, the Deweyan influences on Ambedkar. But what I feel is that Ambedkar is not trying to take overboard a kind of a derivative discourse from Dewey, but begin to refashion some of these particular ideas in entirely novel ways. Partly because the kind of epistemic confrontations that he has are very different from the kind of Deweyan confrontation, including political confrontations. So there is a taking overboard of Dewey, but reinterpreting it in very, very different ways. Also, the idea of the state. Ambedkar has a very strong idea of the state. And the idea of the state that Dewey was very close to some of the British idealists. And And Dewey has a running debate with Russell. Ambedkar reads this. In fact, Ambedkar writes a long review on Russell's work on social reconstruction. And you can see a very strong Deweyan perspective that he comes to bear when he actually approaches Russell and says that, I agree with Russell on this, but don't agree with Russell on this. Dewey was very close to T.H. Green. Ambedkar is also very close to T.H. Green. And partly because he studies in London School of Economics, and he attends a lot of lectures of Sidney Webb. So there is a certain amount of lineage of Marx that comes up through these linkages. So there is, and in several ways for Ambedkar, Ambedkar carries a very distinct legacy through these complex interactions, which I think in many ways unique in India. There is a lot of rereading of European literature that other peoples carry, but Ambedkar carries this, the American aside, and also the radical liberal tradition of in this. But Ambedkar's arguments on democracy are very creative. Much more, I think, much more radical and creative than probably we find in Dewey's work on democracy. This would be my broad submission. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
We actually have a reception planned so perhaps we can get together and talk further.
Sure.
Yeah, and so I invite you all to join us for some snacks, some drinks, okay? And thank you very much, Professor Rodrigues, for a wonderful talk.
Thank you.